We're going to learn about observations, about different types of observation and how we can collect data whilst carrying out an observation. But firstly, what is an observation? It seems kind of obvious, doesn't it? It just means watching or listening to participants engaging in behaviour. This is another non-experimental research method. Before we start in too much detail though, let's have a think about how we might use observations. So one way we can use an observation is an observation as a research method. This means you are collecting your data entirely through observation. It's an observational study. You don't have an independent or dependent variable, you're not doing an experiment, but you're observing behaviour and collecting data about that behaviour. The second way we can use observation is as a research technique. This just means we're doing an experiment of some sort, and in order to gather data about the dependent variable, we might observe. So we're using observation as a way of gathering the results, as gathering data about the dependent variable. So for example, if we were doing a study to see if violent video games cause someone to be more aggressive, we might do an experiment in which one group of people or participants watches a video game, plays a violent video game, and one group of participants plays a simple puzzle type video game, and then we might observe their behaviour in the playground afterwards to see who is more aggressive. We'll be using observation to measure the DV, which is aggressiveness. So different types of observation then. There are a few different terms we need to learn. One key type of observation is a naturalistic observation. This just means you're observing behaviour in its natural environment. So just naturally occurring behaviour in a natural setting. You're not controlling the setting or controlling the behaviour in any way. As the observer, you're not involved in setting anything up. For example, you may do a naturalistic observation of animals in their natural habitat. So you may go to the jungle and watch the mountain gorillas and their behaviours. Or you might go into a classroom and watch children in the classroom or children in a playground. They'll be in natural settings and naturalistic observation. The opposite of that really is a controlled observation. This is where the researchers control either the environment or the behaviour in some way and then observe. It's not just naturally occurring behaviour in a natural setting. The observations here are often done in labs. You might have seen, well, there's a picture there actually on the screen, isn't there, of a one-way mirror, so observers can observe the behaviour going on in the next room without anyone knowing they're there. So what do I mean by the environment or the behaviour is structured to some extent? What I mean is perhaps if you're interested in whether children choose gender stereotyped toys to play with. Rather than just observing them in the playground to see whether boys choose boys-style toys and girls choose girls-style toys to play with, you might actually get them into a controlled setting. So you perhaps place certain toys in a room and then the children come in and they're allowed to play. Because you've chosen the toys that are going to be there and you have placed them there for your experiment, you are controlling the environment in some way, so it would be a controlled observation. Another type of observation is a participant observation. This is simply where the observer takes part in the group that's being observed. They become a participant or a member of the group that's being observed. An example of this might be if you're interested in football hooliganism, you may become part of a football hooligan group and you can observe the behaviour from within the group. Obviously, there are ethical issues with this type of observation. I'm sure you can see straight away. Perhaps pretending to be somebody you're not. There could be ethical issues with that. But it does mean that you can really see behaviours that otherwise you wouldn't be able to see when you're part of that group. Non-participant observation is just the opposite of that. So the idea being, of course, that you are an outside observer. You're not pretending to be part of the group. You're not involved in the group you're observing. You stand on the outside and observe from outside. You're external to the group. Two more key terms to learn are covert and overt observations. A covert observation, just think about being undercover, covert. just means that the participants do not know that you are observing them because you are undercover, you're being covert. So they don't know they're being observed, they don't know they're being watched. Again, immediately probably ethical ideas spring to mind when you hear that, but also think about what's great about people not knowing they're being watched. There are some great positives with that approach. And the opposite to that then, of course, is an overt observation. So the participants are aware they're being observed, and again, there are issues with that, both good and bad. Okay, so those are the types of observation. Things can be a combination of them. You could have an overt, controlled observation. You can combine them. Naturalistic, non-participant observation. So you can combine the different types. They're not mutually exclusive. Okay, so we're going to do an observation. The next thing you'd have to think about is how you're going to collect your data in your observation. There's two ways you can do that. One is called unstructured, and that just means you observe without any predetermined categories of what you're going to observe. You literally just record absolutely everything that happens whilst you're watching. You note down every behaviour you see. Obviously, there's going to be lots of detailed data there. Often researchers use this data collection method when they're not really sure what behaviour to expect, so they can't decide beforehand what they're going to look for, so they just look and observe everything and they note down everything they see. It may be you do this before you do another second type of observation when you've got a bit more of a clear idea about what to expect. The other type of data collection then will be a structured technique or structured observation. This means you have a variety of different systems set in stone before you take part in the observation in order to organise how you're going to observe and enable you to record your data. So the examples of this are, you may have behavioural categories. This is where you've operationalised the behaviour you're expecting to see, and you've come up with distinct categories of behaviour. So, for example, if you're going to observe aggressive play in children, you might come up with the categories hitting, punching, biting, you might pushing over, might be the categories that you come up with, your behavioural categories, things you're going to look for in your observation. And then when you see them in your observation, you can tick them off when you've seen them. Coding frames is just another term which means you may give your behavioural categories codes or code numbers or code letters. The idea of this is it makes recording a little bit easier when you've got lots of different categories to record. So let's have a look at some examples of those. You can see there on the left about the bears in the zoo. They were looking at and doing a naturalistic observation of the animals, the bears, and their behaviour in a bear enclosure. If you look there, you can see the behavioural categories that they have chosen. They have all sorts of different activity levels, lying on back, lying on front, lying on sides. These are all these things they're expecting to see in their observation. Different types of activity level and different activities within those. Those are examples of behavioural categories. There's in the middle there, the observing faces example. You can see these are all sorts of different facial expressions they were looking for in this observation, and they've given them all numbers. So they've got coding numbers. This is an example of a coding frame where each of those different expressions has a number to refer to. Top right there is just another example of a data collection method. So this experiment, they were looking at whether teachers or students are healthier. So they went and observed in a canteen to see what kind of foods the teachers and the students would choose. So before the observation, to make it really clear, rather than having every single item of food on the list that they tick off when they see them buying them, they've decided on what they're going to count as healthy foods and what they're going to count as unhealthy foods. They've done that beforehand, so then they can tick off when people choose healthy or unhealthy foods, their behavioural categories. Okay. So let's have a go at putting all that into practice. We've got here 4 different types of observations, or 4 different observations, I should say. Your job then is to have a look back at all the different types of observation and see if you can identify which observations each one is. So on your sheet, you can note down next to the descriptions of the observations which type of observation you think they are. Are they controlled? Are they structured? Are they covert? Are they overt? Are they naturalistic? Are they participant? Are they non-participant? Have a go. So pause the video now and have a go at writing down what types of observation you think each of these are on your handout. Okay, next up then, let's have a little look at sampling procedures. So when you're doing your observation and you've come up with your behaviour categories and you've got your coding frame all ready to go, when you do your observation, you can decide how you tick off the behaviours you see. You can do this in two ways. You can do event sampling or time sampling. Event sampling is as it sounds. You tick off every time a certain behaviour occurs. So if you're watching the behaviour and the aggressive behaviour in the playground for children, and you've got on your behavioural categories on your scheme, you've got hitting, biting, pushing, and punching. Every time you see punching, you put a tally mark down. Every time you see hitting, you put a tally mark down. Every time you see biting, you put a tally mark down. Event sampling just means you tick off every single time that event happens, that behaviour happens during your observation. That's event sampling. The second type is time sampling. This is where you don't tick off every single time a behaviour occurs, but you have a time frame that you use. There's a number of ways you can do this. One of the most common ways is you have a certain time period, say every 30 seconds, and on that 30 seconds, you look at what they're doing right then on that 30 seconds, and you tick off that behaviour they're doing right then. That's one way you can do it. So you have every 30 seconds during your observation, what they do at that point in time. When the 30 seconds ticks over, you tick that off, what they're doing then. You can do it slightly differently. You could also have a period of time and then you look at think about what the most prominent thing was in that period of time. So, for example, you might say every 10 minutes for 10 seconds, I will have a look what's going on, and then I'm going to tick off the thing that they seem to be doing the most. Okay, that's also time sampling. But the idea is you have time periods and you're only recording the behaviour that happens at that time period. So either right then at that time, or the most prominent thing for a few seconds around that time. So that's time and event sampling. Okay, so why might we do one or the other? Why won't we do time sampling or event sampling in our observation? It depends on what we're looking for and how much of the behaviour we expect there to be. If we're watching something where the behaviour is going to occur lots and lots and lots and lots, we probably won't be able to use event sampling because we won't be able to tick every event off because there'll be too much to see and too much to record. It'll be too confusing, we'll miss stuff. So if there's going to be lots and lots and lots of examples of those behaviours, it's difficult to use event sampling. It'd be better to use time sampling. But if it's something where the behaviour is not going to occur very often, so you want to get a nice good picture of every time it occurs, then event sampling is useful. So have a look at these different observations and pause the video and have a go at thinking about, do you think you'd use event sampling or time sampling, and why would you do that? So pause now and have a go at deciding, would it be event or time sampling? Okay, well, there isn't really a right and wrong answer. You could use either for all of them, but some of them would be easier to do with one or the other. So if you're looking at the instances of aggressive behaviour in children playing in a playground, you might want to do event sampling. There probably won't be that much aggression, you'd like to hope, going on, so you might want to record it every time it occurs. Vocalisation words and sounds made by young children, well, there's lots of vocalisations going on. You may think that actually there's too many to record every time, so you'd perhaps use time sampling there. Compliance to the little green man at a pedestrian crossing by pedestrians. Well, again, you're not going to have that many examples of behaviour. It's either going to be, are they going to follow the green man or not follow the green man? It's probably not going to happen very often, so event sampling would be fine. Litter dropping in a public park, again, it's not going to be confusing or difficult to collect data for every time someone drops a piece of litter. It should be feasible to do event sampling. And behaviour of dog owners when walking their dogs, I guess this really depends on exactly what behaviours you have in your behavioural categories, whether there are lots of different things and you need to do it in time sampling, and also how long you're going to observe for. If you're going to observe for a long period of time, then event sampling gets tiresome and difficult, whereas you might want to do time sampling there, thinking about what the dog owner does with its dog every 5 minutes or every 3 minutes or in a period of time. Okay, and that's everything you need to know for now with observations. We will then have a look at doing our own mini observation in the lesson based on all the things you've just learned about observations and the ways of collecting data.